Hey, welcome to Americans for Truth Live. My name is Mike Heath, and I am going to be hosting the show today because my good friend Peter LaBarbera, who is the leader of Americans for Truth about homosexuality, is doing something very, very important today, and I couldn't be more proud of him for what he's doing. He's making a great sacrifice, given that he lives in Chicago, to be in Washington, D.C. right now as we're recording this live, and it's going out all over the world on Facebook and Periscope and YouTube. And if you're watching us live right now, you can join. You would be able to join us, join in and make comments and be part of the show if we had baked that functionality into americansfortruth.com. We haven't done that yet. We are heading toward doing that. The show is brand new. We just started it a few weeks ago. It's every day at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 Central Time, and that's Monday through Friday. So let all your friends know and be sure to tune in. And you can see it if you can't get it on Facebook or Periscope or YouTube for some reason. You can go to americansfortruth.com anytime, and you can check out the show. You can check out the archives of the show. Every show that we've done so far is archived there, and there's some really, really helpful resources there if you're doing research. The best, I think, resource on the internet for researchers who are looking into this issue, because Peter, I like to say Peter has forgotten more about this issue of the big gay or the gay rights than the rest of us are going to learn in the rest of our lifetimes. And that's because he comes at the issue from the perspective of being a trained and professional journalist. He is a loving father of 5 children who has been hated on like nobody I know for the last 3 decades, as he has done this important work that so many people run away from. And I wanted to, Pete may be joining us. I'm really hoping he joins us. Pray that he does join us, because I'm going to talk in a minute about why he's not able to be with us. But before I do that, I want to just tell you a little bit about how I met Pete. And ironically, or maybe providentially, I met him back in the early 1990s when I was working at the Christian Civic League of Maine. He was on the staff of another good friend of mine, Bob Knight's department at the Family Research Council. And Pete was, oh, look at that. Hey, this is exciting. It looks like we have Pete LaBarbera with us live from the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where I believe he will be speaking shortly. But Pete's going to be able to give us a live update on why he's there. Pete, so what's going on? You're at the National Press Club. You drove all night from Chicago, and now you're at the National Press Club. You don't look any worse for the wear, man. You don't look any worse.
I am worse for the wear. Mike, this is an amazing event. This is basically black and white pastors uniting against the so-called Equality Act, which is probably, I'm certain it is, the most dangerous piece of LGBTQ legislation ever proposed. The Equality Act would basically federalize so-called rights based on homosexuality and transgenderism. And so this is a press conference called Gone Too Far, which features some African-American pastors, people of all persuasions coming together and saying, look, this is a bastardization of civil rights. As one pastor just said, Dan Fisher, you cannot create rights based on immoral behavior. And they're speaking out against this Equality Act, which is one of the top priorities of Nancy. Democrats have taken the House. And so it's mainly religious people, but we're here at the press club, and the idea is that not just the LGBT, the homosexual agenda, the transgender agenda, but also just the immoral agendas, including, of course, infanticide now, which is apparently becoming part of the Democrats' agenda with the law signed by Governor Cuomo in New York. And the idea is it's all gone too far. It's all of these agendas have one after the other really America may be becoming great again economically, but morally we are suffering, we are hurting, we are going down the tubes because of these agendas which are spiraling out of control. And now we're at basically at the point, if the Equality Act were to become law, Mike, it would say essentially that homosexuality is a constitutional right. For the first time, it would make it would create behavior-based federal so-called civil rights.
Pete, thanks for being there. And this is an issue that you and I are, of course, very familiar with, because this is how it started for me in Maine. And you were some 30 years ago supporting us in our effort to resist this in Maine.
Yeah, Mike, I'm sorry. I lost you there for a little bit. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, Mike, you were the only person, I believe, you and Paul Medore and a couple of others, you actually stopped two statewide gay rights bills. But this federal thing, this Equality Act, Mike, is really, it would make it part of the Civil Rights Code. The federal, what we all think of as one of the most noble things, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it would make homosexuality part of that code. And so this is a radical redefinition of so-called civil rights. But imagine we see all the oppression, the undermining of freedom that your Maine law, like these local and state laws have done. Imagine now if we had a federal bill, a federal law over everything, which was now enforcing these so-called gay rights as the law of the land. This is probably the most momentous thing that's ever come down the pike, and Pelosi is saying that this is one of her top priorities. So I'm going to be going in there to speak shortly, but hopefully if the show's still on, I can come back and tell you what I've seen.
Pete, tell me, why aren't there 1,000 pastors at this press conference?
Well, there's probably 50 people in the room. It's a fledgling effort. The website has gone too far. I believe it's gonetoofar.com. But what we hope is that we will have a real diversity as opposed to the fake diversity of the left. Real diversity, all standing behind godly morality against this abomination called the Equality Act. Of course, it's misnamed, Mike. It's fake equality. The left are very good at naming their legislation and all their efforts. They give them noble sounding names, but this is very dangerous, Mike. This is the type of bill that could put Christian businesses, Christian ministries out of business. It could affect the nonprofit ministries down the road, because it would basically create these artificial rights. But I've got to go back in to give my talk, and if you're still on, I'll call back.
All right, great. Thanks for joining us, Pete.
Thank you, Mike. Okay.
So Jared's going to throw up the website for gonetoofar.org, gonetoofar.org, and they do have a proclamation on the website. And I want to read from the website their mission statement, which is to reestablish the Judeo-Christian ethic in the United States, to provide a Christian perspective on issues related to politics, economics, psychology, sociology, and human sexuality in the public square, to provide a biblical, factual, biological perspective to the many complex issues facing a postmodern culture. And in addition, on the website, the group Gone Too Far says, truth is true for all people in all times and at all places. There is no such thing as white truth and black truth. There is just truth. There is no male truth and female truth. Again, there is only truth. Jesus Christ is truth. The Word of God is truth. And again, that's gonetofar.org. And I hope you'll join me in going to that website today and signing their proclamation. And also, I want you to think about your pastor and think about your church and think about Christianity in general in the United States during your lifetime. We have come to think of Christianity and practice it as if it is something that's private and personal. And what I just read to you, this mission statement, talks about how the Judeo-Christian ethic is something that should be applied to politics, economics, psychology, sociology, human sexuality in the public square. Not just when the doors are closed Sunday morning and you're safely hidden in the four walls of what my friend Coach Dave Dobbenmeyer calls the stained glass fortress. That's not the only time when Christianity, when the gospel should be talked about. And also think about the fact that sermons, for the most part, will stick with Bible texts as they should. But when it comes time to talk about, in plain language, politics or law or sociology or human sexuality, sermons will oftentimes avoid the subject of God's judgment. Sermons will oftentimes avoid a serious, meaningful, and reasonable discussion of God sending people to hell as a result of choosing bad behavior when it comes to sexuality. And so all of us who have been alive in the United States and in the West and attending church for these decades have been propagandized because we haven't been presented with in sermons and in our churches the truth, the gospel, as it applies to politics, as it applies to law. And my own opinion is that's one of the reasons that the best that the United States can do in terms of giving the world a powerful leader is Donald Trump. And I supported Donald Trump 2.5 years ago, and I'm going to support him again in 2020. But Donald Trump is no great Christian. I mean, Donald Trump has a lot of issues when it comes to morality, especially this issue of sexual morality. But Donald Trump is clearly willing to speak his mind as people would expect a man to speak his mind. He's willing to be hated, and that's hasn't been a character trait that we've seen in modern presidents. And so many folks, many Americans are drawn to him because of those character traits, even though he is compromised. For example, on this issue of homosexuality, you're not going to see him championing the view of Christ on human sexuality, which is that if you so much as look at another man's wife, then in other words, if you so much as lust, then you've committed the act. Jesus says that in his Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 5. And you should check that out, read it, think about it, and apply it to this issue. So I wanted to talk about how I was talking about when Pete came in, and I'm so glad we were able to get that report about how I met him. I actually met him when I was on the staff of the Christian Civic League of Maine, and we were being drawn into this public debate. That organization was formed in 1897, and it has served the people of Maine by being what some called the conscience of Maine. It existed to elect honest and competent public officials, to encourage all the people of Maine in good citizenship, and to enact good laws and provide for their impartial enforcement. And I was the leader of the group for a decade and a half. And before I became the leader, this issue of adding sexual orientation to the law became huge, very controversial, and front page. And it was front page news for all the years that I was the leader of the league. But when I met Pete, he was advising us. He was providing us with excellent resources so that I and our staff and our board of directors could think through what would be the proper Christian response to the idea that sexual orientation should be added to the Human Rights Act in Maine. And we we invested a lot of prayerful time. We thought long and hard about how we should address the issue, and we decided that we had to fight in the political sense. We had to fight to bring the truth to the people of Maine. And so that contest lasted from the early 90s until about 2005. I think it was 2004 when the people who were pushing this had finally worn down the good people of Maine to the point where they just gave up. And to this day, I don't really believe that a majority of the people of Maine think that sexual orientation should be in the Human Rights Act, nor do I think that they believe that two men or two women can be married. I don't think a majority of the people of that great state believe that. But what I heard over and over and over as the years went by was that it didn't matter what they believed. It didn't matter what they thought about that particular issue when it came to government and law and politics, because no matter what they did, and they proved it to themselves, because the debate that we carried on in Maine was not a lobbying campaign. We didn't debate it in the halls of the legislature. We actually, because of the Christian Civic League of Maine's courage and willingness to prioritize this issue, we actually took the issue to the people of Maine, and we debated it as the result of signature drives, referendums. And so, unlike so much of what's being done on abortion and homosexuality and a lot of the social issues in America today, which are often decided by a judge or a slim majority of judges, as with the Obergefell decision in the Supreme Court, it was just one judge, one vote that destroyed the institution of marriage in the United States a few years ago. Unlike that reality, in Maine, the Christian Civic League of Maine stepped up and said, we're gonna believe in the people of Maine. We're going to believe that we can take this issue to the people of Maine, and we're going to believe that we can persuade a majority of them to agree with us. And so we took that approach, and we were able to win, but they outspent us over time, and they lied a lot. I mean, their whole movement is a lie. It's based on a lie. And so the fact that they were willing to lie, combined with the fact that they were willing to spend millions of dollars in Maine, which is just two media markets, very small state, 1 million people, led to our eventual defeat on gay rights. So sexual orientation was added to the Human Rights Act, and then they passed same-sex marriage using the referendum. So they actually flipped. They took our desire to go to the people of Maine and not leave it up to the politicians in Augusta, Maine, and they adopted our strategy, and they eventually, using money and lies, propaganda, they persuaded a majority of the people of Maine to agree with them. And in order to do that, they have to do something that's profoundly diabolical and dangerous for any civilization. And that is, they have to attack the religion of the nation. And America was founded, and our Constitution was written, and our jurisprudence and our politics are dependent upon the Christian religion. I like to remember what John Adams observed. He was our second president, when he said, and I'm going to paraphrase, that without Christian morality, this form of government that we've created, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, the founding fathers, this form of government, this limited government, with the separation of powers between the executive and the legislative and the judiciary branches of government, this form of government is not going to work, Adams observed. And his idea was that if the people were not discipled to use a Christian word, if the people of America were not choosing on their own as free citizens, as individual citizens, if they were not choosing on their own to follow the Ten Commandments, to put God first, the God of the Bible, to honor their mom and dad, to to not steal, to not murder. If they were not choosing on their own to follow the Ten Commandments, then the government, as it was circumscribed by the Constitution, a very limited government, wasn't a monarchy, it was a republic with a written constitution that depended very heavily on the individual American choosing to do the right thing, choosing to be good, choosing to be virtuous, choosing to be responsible, to pay their bills on time, to not think of the government as the source of wealth or as the source of safety necessarily or primarily, especially when it came to their own personal safety. That's why gun rights are such a big issue in the United States. I believe that we're one of the only countries in the world remaining that has such a robust protection of gun rights, and that's because when the country was created, the founders believed that as the individual American chose to follow the Ten Commandments, they would protect themselves in a just way. They would choose to use lethal force in a way that wasn't tyrannical as individuals. And of course, they built in protections to make sure that minorities couldn't become tyrannical, and if so, the government would be able to use force to put down that sort of those sort of efforts that would break up the civilization, break up the nation. So I've digressed off onto, but that the Christian Civic League rooted its reasoning and its work in that understanding of America and brought that understanding to its decision to go to the people of Maine, believing that they would do the right thing if we told them the truth. And we did tell them the truth the whole time. I never, as the leader, ran away from making arguments that were rooted in Christianity. In fact, I remember speaking at a preparatory school one time, and I was debating an attorney, and during the Q&A, I gave a speech, and I made the moral argument, not necessarily from the Bible, but from the history of the West. But the point is that my remarks made a moral argument. It wasn't a legal argument. And when during the Q&A, one of the students asked me to present a legal argument, and I answered and said, well, I suppose I could do that. I've been in the issue enough so that I could present a legal argument, but I'm the leader of the Christian Civic League of Maine, and number one. Number two, I'm not a lawyer. I have a degree in philosophy, and I've made a philosophical and I've made a moral argument, and I'm going to let that stand, and I'm going to challenge you, the students of that preparatory school, to take those arguments seriously, to weigh them fairly, to be just with those moral arguments, and to not allow attorneys to become pastors or priests or philosophers. Attorneys make legal arguments, and that's fine. They should make legal arguments. But if we're going to build a civilization, then we're going to have religious leaders who are going to make moral arguments, and the republic is going to sort all of that out through using democratic means, and that worked for America up until recently. I don't think it's working anymore, and I think it's not working anymore because America has become largely, especially at the institutional level, immoral. Hollywood, our government, even our churches are giving up on doing the hard work of really understanding that if we make bad choices, we're going to get bad results, including the possible result that we would live forever separated from God. And why wouldn't we live forever separated from God if our choice in this life is to hate him, is to ignore his commandments, is to live our lives as if being a mother or being a father to children who then become mothers and fathers when they come of age, who then give us grandchildren. If we're going to choose to build a civilization that doesn't uphold that, then why shouldn't we expect to live forever separated from a God who created a world to work that way? We should expect hell. We should expect his judgment. And history shows that civilizations and nations are judged. They do collapse. They do. I mean, Rome isn't here anymore. I mean, look at all the civilizations throughout history that became as powerful. Well, there's none that have become as powerful as we are in the military sense and in the economic sense and in the prosperity sense. But there are civilizations that have been very successful that made bad choices and that ended up collapsing. And don't for a minute think that this cannot happen to the United States of America. We've got over $20 trillion of debt that we know about. And if you want to go and Google USA Watchdog, you can find some shows that say that we may have, and prove to my satisfaction, that we may have way up in the tens of trillions of dollars of debt. That there's a lot going on in that issue. We're not going to get into that today. It's not the point of Americans for Truth Live. And as we wrap up the show, it looks like Peter isn't going to be able to join us again. Please pray for Peter, as he is going to be with us from Washington, D.C. for the rest of the week. And then he'll be traveling home to his family toward the end of the week. And pray that God would open doors for him that would enable him to continue to build a secure and solid foundation for Americans for Truth. The ministry that he's poured himself into for the last 20, 25 years. And let your friends know about Pete. Pray for him and go to his website. Jared probably has it up there right now, AmericansForTruth.com, and on the right hand side there's a donate button, and it's blue, and you can click on that and you can make a donation electronically. I think there's probably an address somewhere on the website if you want to mail in a check. We would love to hear from you, even if you can't send a check. You can email Pete, americansfortruth@gmail.com. But check us out. Let your children know that AmericansForTruth.com is a resource for them as they confront this issue in their schools or in their colleges. And we are very grateful for you watching the show. Spread the word about the show and think about coming on the show. As I said, we're going to be building in a join the show link to AmericansForTruth.com. So you can count on us being there every Monday through Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern time. We'll be there live, and you can always catch the archive later. And we would love to make you a part of the Americans for Truth support base. And we'd love to move ahead with you in Christ to address this issue in a reasonable and in a loving way. So thanks so much for tuning in to Americans for Truth Live.